was standing outside my own house at midnight, holding my two kids, when I realized I was no longer welcome inside it. The gate was locked from the inside, not broken, not jammed, locked, deliberately. The street light above me flickered, buzzing softly, like it was mocking the silence around us. My younger child was half asleep, her face pressed into my shoulder. The older one kept asking the same question again and again, her voice cracking every time. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My phone vibrated in my hand. Not a call. A message. One sentence. That was it. No explanation, no apology, no concern for the children he helped bring into this world. Just a decision, already made, already executed. My throat went dry as I reread it, hoping the words would change if I stared long enough. They didn't. My ears rang. The world felt distant, like I was underwater. Out of instinct, I opened my banking app. I don't know why. Maybe hope, maybe denial. The screen loaded slowly. Then it hit me harder than the message ever could. 0. Every account. Empty. Savings gone. Emergency money gone. Even the small amount I kept aside for the kids. Gone. My fingers went numb. I tried refreshing the screen like it was a glitch. It wasn't. The house behind the gate was quiet. Lights on, curtains drawn. Everything looked normal from the outside, and that hurt the most. Inside those walls was the life I thought I had. Inside was safety. Inside was the future I planned my sacrifices around. And now I was on the street, with 2 children, a dead phone battery creeping closer, and no idea where to go. Cars passed by slowly. Someone glanced at me, then looked away. I wondered what they saw. Just another woman standing too long outside a house, or someone whose life had just collapsed in real time. My arms ached from holding the kids, but I didn't put them down. I was scared that if I did, everything would finally feel real. I kept asking myself the same question over and over, like my mind was stuck on a broken loop. How do you go from being a family to being erased overnight? And why did he make sure I had nothing left when he walked away? I wasn't always this woman standing outside locked doors, counting coins in her head and breaths in her chest. There was a time when I believed I had built something unbreakable, a life that mattered, a family that would grow old together. I remember those early days clearly, the way trust felt effortless, the way love didn't need proof. Back then, I thought choosing him meant choosing safety. I gave more than time. I gave direction to my life. When opportunities came, I stepped back so he could step forward. When decisions had to be made, I convinced myself that compromise was love. I told myself it was temporary, that someday it would be my turn. That day never came, but I kept believing it would. Because families survive on belief long before they survive on money. When the kids were born, I thought everything made sense. Every sacrifice suddenly had a purpose. Sleepless nights, missed chances, quiet disappointments, I wore them like badges of honor. I was proud of the way I held everything together, even when he was distant, even when I felt invisible. I told myself this was adulthood, this was marriage, this was normal. There were moments that should have warned me. Small things at first. Conversations that stopped feeling like conversations. Decisions made without me, then explained later as if I wouldn't understand. Money became something I wasn't supposed to worry about. I'll handle it, he'd say. And I let him. Trust is dangerous when it's unconditional. I learned to read moods instead of words, to adjust my tone, my needs, my expectations. Peace became my responsibility. If something felt wrong, I swallowed it. If I felt lonely, I blamed myself. I kept the family running while slowly disappearing inside it. I didn't realize how small I was becoming because I was too busy holding everyone else together. Still, I believed in him. I defended him when people questioned things. I convinced myself that loyalty meant silence, that love meant patience. I told myself that every relationship goes through phases, and this was just a difficult one. I had no idea that while I was trying to fix us, he was planning his exit. Looking back, the signs were there. Phone calls taken in other rooms, sudden urgency about paperwork I didn't need to see, accounts I was told not to worry about. I felt the distance, but I explained it away, because accepting the truth would have meant accepting that everything I built my life around was unstable, and I wasn't ready for that. What hurts the most isn't just that he left, it's that he let me believe I was secure right up until the moment he pulled the ground from under my feet. I trusted him with my future, my children's stability, my entire sense of safety. I didn't think someone who shared meals with me, laughed with our kids, and slept next to me every night was capable of erasing us without warning. I thought love protected you from that kind of cruelty. I didn't know then that trust, once given to the wrong person, can be used as a weapon, and I had no idea that the life I was holding together so carefully was already slipping through my fingers, quietly, intentionally, long before that locked gate ever closed behind me. The betrayal didn't arrive like a storm. There was no shouting, no dramatic goodbye, no final argument that warned me something was about to end. It arrived quietly, disguised as an ordinary day. That's what makes it harder to forgive. He looked at me that morning the same way he always did, ate breakfast, spoke about routine things, kissed the kids, left the house like he always had. And I believed him because nothing felt urgent enough to question. Hours passed before I noticed something was wrong. It started with small disruptions. Calls that didn't connect, messages that stayed unread. At first, I told myself he was busy. He often was. I had trained myself not to overthink. But as the hours stretched, a heaviness settled in my chest, a quiet panic I couldn't explain. By evening, the house felt different, too still, like something had been removed without leaving a trace. I checked his usual places, shoes gone, clothes missing, important documents no longer where they were supposed to be. My heart began to race, but my mind fought back. I kept telling myself there was a logical explanation. There had to be. That's when I checked the accounts. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. Numbers that didn't match my memory. Transactions I didn't recognize. Withdrawals made with precision, not reckless, planned. It felt like reading a story written in a language I almost understood but didn't want to translate. My hands shook as I scrolled, my breathing shallow, my vision blurring. The truth began to surface, slowly and painfully. This wasn't a sudden decision. This wasn't anger or impulse. This was preparation. While I was packing lunches and folding laundry, he was emptying accounts. While I was planning school expenses and birthdays, he was planning an exit that didn't include us. When the message finally came, it didn't explain anything. It confirmed everything. No accountability, no concern, just distance already established. He didn't ask about the kids, didn't ask where we'd go, didn't ask how we'd manage. It was as if he had already rewritten his life without us, and this was just a formality. I felt split in two, one part of me still clinging to denial, the other screaming that this was real. I wanted to believe there had been a misunderstanding, that he would come back, that this was temporary. My heart kept searching for the man I thought I knew, while reality stood in front of me, undeniable and cold. What hurt most was the intention behind it. He didn't just leave, he made sure I couldn't follow. He didn't just walk away, he removed every safety net, every option, every ounce of security I thought I had. It felt deliberate, calculated, like he wanted to make sure I felt powerless. I replayed memories in my head, desperately searching for the moment it all changed. The smile that was fake, the promise that meant nothing. I realized that the man I trusted wasn't suddenly gone. He had been hiding in plain sight the whole time. That night, sitting with my children asleep beside me, I finally stopped making excuses for him. The denial cracked, and reality rushed in. This wasn't abandonment caused by circumstance. This was betrayal, chosen with clarity. And as devastating as that realization was, it came with something else, something unfamiliar and terrifying. The understanding that the person who hurt me the most knew exactly what he was doing and didn't care. The days after he left blurred together, but the pressure never eased. It sat on my chest from the moment I woke up to the moment exhaustion finally pulled me under. Every morning began with the same question: how do I get through today without breaking in front of my children? Fear doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers, constantly, until you can't hear anything else. The first reality to hit was money, or the absence of it. Every small expense felt like a threat. Milk, transport, school-related costs I had never questioned before. I began calculating everything in my head, over and over, like if I counted carefully enough, the numbers might change. They didn't. I started avoiding phone calls because I knew what they would be about. Payments, deadlines, questions I didn't have answers for. People noticed something was wrong. They always do. Family members asked careful questions, trying not to scare me. Friends offered vague support, the kind that sounds comforting but doesn't solve anything. I smiled when I needed to. I said I was managing. I wasn't lying, I was surviving, and that felt close enough to the truth. At night, the fear was louder. The house felt too big and too empty at the same time. Every sound made me tense. I kept checking the door, the windows, my phone. Sleep came in short, restless stretches. I'd wake up with my heart racing, convinced I had missed something important, an opportunity, a warning, a way out. My mind replayed the same thoughts on a loop. What if I can't do this? What if I fail them? Clues began to surface, small but unsettling. Paperwork that didn't add up, dates that didn't match his explanations, people mentioning things he never told me. Each discovery added weight to my chest. I started realizing how much I didn't know about my own life, how many decisions had been made without me. The more I learned, the more trapped I felt. I tried reaching out again, hoping for cooperation, if not compassion. The responses were short, controlled, emotionless. It felt like speaking to someone who had already moved on, while I was still standing in the wreckage. The imbalance was unbearable. He had distance, I had consequences. He had options, I had responsibility, for two lives that depended entirely on me. The pressure wasn't just financial, it was emotional. The children asked questions I wasn't ready to answer. They sensed the change, the tension, the absence. I chose my words carefully, protecting them while carrying the full weight myself. There were moments when I had to step away just to breathe, just to keep from falling apart where they could see me. Every day raised the stakes. I couldn't afford mistakes. I couldn't afford hesitation. Yet I felt paralyzed, caught between fear and determination. I was running on instinct, not confidence. The safety I thought I had built was gone, replaced by uncertainty at every turn. And somewhere in the middle of all that pressure, something shifted. The fear didn't disappear, but it hardened. I stopped waiting for things to get better on their own. I started paying attention, connecting dots, asking questions I was too afraid to ask before. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't just about abandonment. There was more he wasn't telling me, and whatever it was going to change everything. I couldn't live inside uncertainty anymore. Fear had pushed me far enough, and silence was no longer something I could afford. I reached out again, not with hope this time, but with determination. I needed answers, not for closure, but for survival. Every message I sent felt like stepping closer to a fire I had avoided for too long. When he finally responded, it wasn't relief I felt, it was tension, the kind that tightens your jaw and makes your pulse thud in your ears. His words were calm, controlled, almost dismissive. There was no urgency, no concern, no acknowledgement of the damage he had caused. It was as if my panic was an inconvenience to him. I pushed harder. I asked direct questions about the money, about the timing, about the decisions made without me. Each question was met with deflection, half answers, statements designed to shut me down rather than explain anything. The more I pressed, the more distant he became. It felt intentional, like he was trying to remind me how little power I had left. That's when the cruelty surfaced. Not loud, not aggressive, subtle, measured. He made it clear that he had planned this carefully, that everything was already handled on his end. The message was unmistakable. I was dealing with the aftermath of a story that had already ended for him. One line stood out, sharper than the rest, not because of what it said, but because of how easily it was delivered. It reduced my struggle, my fear, my responsibility for our children into something trivial, something inconvenient. In that moment, something inside me cracked, not into despair, but into clarity. I realized he wasn't avoiding responsibility because he didn't understand the consequences. He understood them perfectly. He just didn't care. And that understanding hurt more than the abandonment itself. It stripped away the last illusion I had been holding on to, that deep down, he was still the person I trusted. The confrontation didn't bring answers. It brought confirmation. Confirmation that empathy was no longer part of the equation, that cooperation would not come easily, that if I wanted stability for my children, I would have to fight for it alone. Emotionally, I was unraveling. Every interaction drained me. Anger replaced fear, then collapsed into exhaustion. I found myself replaying his words in my head, questioning my own worth, my choices, my judgment. There were moments when the weight of it all felt unbearable, like I was standing at the edge of something I might not recover from. But at the same time, something else was happening beneath the surface, a shift I didn't recognize at first. Each cold response, each dismissive message, each reminder of how calculated his actions were, they pushed me further away from pleading and closer to resolve. The breaking point came quietly. No tears, no panic, just a deep, steady realization settling in my chest. I stopped asking for understanding. I stopped expecting fairness. I started preparing for confrontation in a different way. Because I understood now that this wasn't a misunderstanding to be resolved. It was a conflict to be faced. And whether he realized it yet or not, I was no longer the person he thought he had left behind. I didn't regain control all at once. It started with something small, so small I almost ignored it. A message from someone I hadn't spoken to in a long time. At first, I didn't understand why they were reaching out. Then I read it again, slowly, carefully, and my chest tightened in a way that felt different from fear. They weren't asking how I was. They weren't offering sympathy. They were asking a question, one that suggested they knew more than I did, more about him, more about what he had been doing before he left. I hesitated before responding. Something told me this wasn't coincidence. This wasn't concern. This was information. As we spoke, pieces began to align. Dates, movements, decisions that had never made sense before. I realized that the distance I had felt for months wasn't emotional detachment. It was distraction. He hadn't been pulling away because he was lost. He had been focused elsewhere, building something separate while I held everything together at home. I started looking back through old records with new eyes, messages I had brushed off, financial activity I hadn't questioned, conversations that ended too quickly. Each detail added clarity. What once felt like confusion now felt like a pattern, and patterns don't happen by accident. The power balance began to shift, not because I confronted him again, but because I stopped reacting emotionally and started observing strategically. I gathered information quietly. I documented everything. I stopped filling in gaps with hope and started filling them with facts. The more I learned, the steadier I became. For the first time since he left, I felt something close to control. Not over him, but over my own reality. The panic that once dictated my decisions gave way to focus. I wasn't trying to understand him anymore. I was trying to protect my children and myself. Another message arrived days later. This one confirmed what I had started to suspect. There were decisions made long before that locked gate, plans that involved more than just leaving. He had positioned himself carefully, assuming I would be too overwhelmed to question anything, assuming I would break quietly. That assumption changed everything. I reached out for professional guidance, not to accuse, but to understand my options. I asked questions I had never imagined needing answers to. Each response strengthened me. Knowledge replaced fear. Preparation replaced desperation. I wasn't scrambling anymore. I was planning. Emotionally, it was still heavy. Betrayal doesn't disappear when you understand it, but clarity has a strange way of stabilizing you. I stopped blaming myself. I stopped wondering what I could have done differently. The truth made one thing clear. This wasn't about my failure. It was about his choices. The turning point wasn't dramatic. There was no confrontation, no announcement, just a quiet shift inside me. I stood taller. I spoke differently. I stopped asking for permission to survive. He didn't know it yet, but the story he thought he controlled was slipping out of his hands. The version where I stayed silent, confused, and powerless no longer existed. Because now I knew the truth, and I was ready for what came next. The truth didn't come out all at once. It surfaced piece by piece, like something buried too deep to be uncovered without effort. But once it started, there was no stopping it. Every document I reviewed, every confirmation I received, every timeline I reconstructed pointed to the same conclusion. This wasn't abandonment driven by impulse, it was a calculated escape. What he had hidden so carefully began unraveling the moment facts replaced assumptions. Financial trails led to decisions made months before he left, commitments he had entered into while still living under the same roof as us, plans built on the certainty that I wouldn't question, wouldn't push back, wouldn't be prepared. He had underestimated one thing: what clarity can do to someone who has nothing left to lose. When the truth finally reached the surface, it wasn't private. It couldn't be. Too many people were involved. Too many lies depended on silence. The image he had protected, responsible, dependable, untouchable, began to fracture. Slowly at first, then all at once. The same confidence he once used to dismiss me turned into panic when explanations were demanded. I watched from a distance as the narrative shifted, not with satisfaction, but with disbelief. This was the same person who had spoken to me with certainty, who believed consequences belonged to everyone else. Seeing that certainty collapse was surreal. The control he relied on disappeared the moment truth replaced his version of events. The emotional impact hit me harder than I expected. Not relief, not victory, a deep, overwhelming heaviness. because with the truth came the final confirmation that the life I thought I had was never what I believed it to be. I wasn't just abandoned, I was deceived over time, carefully, intentionally. When accountability finally arrived, it wasn't dramatic, it was firm, inescapable, the kind that doesn't raise its voice but leaves no room to run. The same questions he once avoided were now unavoidable. The same confidence he used against me failed him when facts stood in his way. In that moment, something shifted permanently inside me. I stopped seeing him as someone who had power over my life. I saw him clearly for what he was, not what I hoped he could be, and that clarity was freeing in a way I didn't expect. Justice didn't look like revenge, it looked like acknowledgement, responsibility, the truth standing on its own without me having to defend it. I didn't need to convince anyone anymore. The evidence spoke louder than my pain ever could. As everything unfolded, I realized this wasn't just the climax of his story, it was the end of my silence. The fear that once controlled me lost its grip. I wasn't standing outside locked gates anymore. I was standing inside my own strength, finally aware of it. The explosion wasn't loud. It was final, and as the dust settled, I understood something with absolute certainty. He didn't leave me with nothing. He left me with the truth, and that changed everything. After everything came out, life didn't suddenly become easy. Healing never works that way, but it became honest. The chaos settled into something quieter, something real. The consequences he faced were not dramatic or satisfying in the way movies portray justice, but they were permanent. Doors closed, control lost, the certainty he once carried vanished. And for the first time, the weight he had placed on me was no longer mine to carry alone. I focused on rebuilding, not proving, on stability, not explanations. My days became about small victories, routine, safety, and presence. I learned how strong I could be when I stopped waiting for someone else to take responsibility. The fear that once ruled my decisions softened into caution, then into confidence. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was standing. Emotionally, there were scars. There still are. Some nights, the memories return unexpectedly. The shock, the silence, the moment I realized everything had been taken without warning. But those memories no longer define me. They remind me of how far I've come and what I will never accept again. My children changed too, not in ways that broke them, but in ways that made them resilient. I became more present, more honest, more grounded. I learned that strength isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up every day, quietly, when you choose to move forward despite what you've lost. What stayed with me the longest wasn't anger, it was clarity. The understanding that love without respect is not love, that trust should never require silence, and that walking away from someone who harms you is not failure, it's self-respect. I don't tell this story for sympathy. I tell it because there are people listening who feel trapped in the same silence I once lived in. People who are afraid to ask questions because they fear the answers. If this story feels familiar, know this. You are not weak for staying, and you are not broken for leaving. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is face the truth, even when it destroys the life you thought you had. I didn't get the ending I imagined. I got something better. I got my voice back. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to subscribe so you don't miss stories like this. Comment if you've been through something similar. Your voice matters more than you think. And share this with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone.